will lead us into the Shantae will lead us into the in-depth exploration of the acquisition process, and we also have several subject matter experts present to answer your questions in the chat. Before I turn the presentation over to Shantae, I'd like to share a few housekeeping instructions. We have automatically muted your audio to help us control the sound quality of today's presentation. On your Zoom dashboard, you will see a chat pod as well as a Q&A area. For this session, please use the chat pod for any administrative issues you are experiencing, such as sound issues, and one of our CES team members can assist you. We ask that you use the Q&A pod to ask any of your questions related to today's presentation. We have a team of acquisition experts with us today to answer any of the questions you have during today's presentation. Any questions that we are unable to get to today due to time will be noted, and all questions will be answered and posted on our website, gsa.gov/CES. All right, with introductions and instructions out of the way, I'm going to pass things to Shantae. Shantae, you have the floor.
Great, thank you so much, Victor. Thank you all for being here today. Victor did a really good job kind of going through the agenda here, but just want to go through it really quickly. Since today's audience comes from a various executive branches, courts, what have you, with varying understanding of the acquisition process, we're going to start with a high-level overview of the contract process for small projects, mostly for those that are valued at the simplified acquisition threshold, which is $250,000 or less. We're going to cover the acquisition process and the environment it operates in, taking into account what governs the acquisition program, constraints and risks, timelines, customer interactions, and procurement integrity. We will also discuss how we assess and monitor contractor performance in order to obtain high-quality services and products for our customers. We can go to the next one. Thank you. Okay, so your RWA was accepted. What happens next? The GSA program office begins planning your project, your contract is awarded, work begins, the team monitors the contractor, we do all the payments, we close it out, and then we're done, right? Seems pretty easy. Not exactly. There's a lot more to it. As a federal government, we all operate in a structured environment, and we must be cognizant of how we spend taxpayers' money, which is why we have the acquisition process. It is governed and shaped by both external and internal regulations and policies. Before we get into the actual acquisition process, I think it's important to understand what governs and shapes the acquisition process. So let us get started with the governing regulations and policies. To ensure compliance and fairness and proper spending of allocated dollars, the acquisition process follows federal and agency level acquisition regulations and policies. First, it's mandatory for GSA contracting officers to conduct business based on the Federal Acquisition Regulations, or the FAR. So I'll use that throughout the presentation. This is the primary regulation that governs the acquisition process for all executive agencies. The FAR provides guidance and procedures for acquiring goods and services, including contracts, grants, and agreements, including those that are funded via RWA. Next, we have the General Services Administration Acquisition Manual, or the GSAM. So the GSAM supplements the FAR, and it applies specifically to acquisitions for GSA, those including, procurement, leasing, and disposal of property. Another source of governing regulations and policies is our GSA Acquisition Policy Library. GSA's Senior Procurement Executive has the authority to issue acquisition letters and class deviations to the FAR and the GSAM. These documents are all located in the GSA's Acquisition Policy Library, so these will be linked in the slides if you don't have them already, and provide additional guidance to contracting officers, often supplementing the GSAM. The GSA Acquisition Policy Division within our Office of Government-Wide Policy maintains and updates this library. Now, the added layer is the GSA PBS internal policies. So we have PBS Procurement Instructional Bulletins and PBS Procurement Instructional Letters, which are managed by PBS's Office of Acquisition Management. Those are referred to often as PIBs and PILs. So these supplement all those other acquisition policies that we spoke of prior, the FAR, GSAM, and all of the Office of Acquisition Policy guidance. So the difference between the two is that a procurement instructional bulletin, a PIB, it establishes PBS procurement policy, whereas the PILs, the procurement instructional letters, are more about PBS procurement best practices. Oftentimes, a really good PIL that's a great best practice ends up becoming a PIB, which ends up being a policy. There's still more. So as you may already know, PBS has 11 regions with personnel located all over the United States. So as a result, regional guidance may also be required. Regional guidance is developed by the region's policy groups, and they can come in the form of directives, bulletins, and standard operating procedures, and they're tailored specifically to the regional acquisition community. Regional guidance supplements national policy and provides additional instructional guidance to regional employees, which is why, if you have worked in different regions, some requirements and policies may be different. Hopefully, you're starting to understand how and why this might be a lengthy process. So here, in addition to the regulations that we have, there are also other conditions that may impact the acquisition process. So I don't want to go through all of these on the slide deck, but I do want to hit on a couple of them that are very top of mind for GSA. We can all attest to the fact that there is increased regulatory scrutiny and compliance requirements for better oversight and more transparency. For example, there's a growing emphasis on compliance with cybersecurity standards, environmental law, and labor practices. The federal government is progressively focused on transparency and accountability, which can add layers to the acquisition process and lengthen the time to award contracts. Another example of conditions impacting acquisition process is the strong emphasis on small businesses and socioeconomic programs. In partnership with the Small Business Administration, GSA sets annual goals to maximize opportunities for small businesses, which means contracting officers have to set aside a significant portion of federal contracts for small businesses, including those belonging to differing socioeconomic categories, such as small businesses owned by women, veterans, and minorities. These programs can either add or reduce the acquisition process. So, for example, we have the authority to enter into sole source contracts under the Aided Business Development Program. And in that situation, your procurement lead time can be significantly reduced because a contracting officer works directly with one vendor, which means we're only evaluating one proposal instead of in a competitive environment where we're evaluating multiple proposals. Next is sustainability. Sustainability is high on GSA's list of priorities. So the environmental, social, and governance considerations, ESG, definitely impact our acquisition process. So think about the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law or the Inflation Reduction Act, which is mandating modernization and improvements of federal buildings and land ports of entry across the United States. These laws increasingly mandate the inclusion of sustainability criteria in contracts. The federal government continues to require contractors to align with federal sustainability goals, including reducing our carbon footprint and adopting green technologies. While these considerations can improve sustainability, they can also lengthen the acquisition process, as more time is required for ensuring due diligence and more detailed evaluation of contractors' environmental impact. While I didn't cover everything on this list, you can see how these conditions can not only impact the acquisition process timeline, but also drive how contracting officers approach requirements and work with vendors. So now that we have a better understanding of the rules and regulations and conditions impacting acquisitions, we can now move to the acquisition process. There are 5 main phases to the acquisition process: planning, solicitation, evaluation, award, and post-award. We'll discuss these in more details over the next few slides. So you might be asking yourself, okay, I've submitted my requirements package to PBS. Why is it dropping in this big black hole? Why does it take forever before I hear back? What's this big secret? Well, I will tell you that there's no secret, and your requirement is being worked behind the scenes. We got to go to the planning stage. So starting the planning stage, that's that first step. As our customer, you are all very important in the planning stage of this process. Your input is integral in ensuring that you get the service and the product that you need. It's imperative that you get your stakeholders to define their key performance outcomes for this requirement and properly define your requirements from the very beginning. During this phase, GSA will form an acquisition team, conduct market research, determine the acquisition strategy, work with the small business community, to meet your needs. So we'll start with the requirements package. So once a requirement has been identified, a requirements package needs to be prepared and submitted to the contracting officer to begin that acquisition process. So you see a lot of things listed here. That's still not an exhaustive list. Depending on the size or the contract type, regional guidance, there may be other documents that make up this requirements package, but these are the pretty typical from requirement to requirement. So what is this package? This consists of all these things listed here. It tells us about what the funds are. It tells us we have an approved RWA. These include all the documents and specifications that might be needed to get your product. And this is what the contracting officer uses to communicate your need to the vendor community. A fully complete package is very important as it ensures clear communication of the government's requirement. A well-defined requirements package helps prevent delays and misunderstandings between vendors and the government. Good requirements packages can also help with getting effective price proposals, as the contractor is not pricing unknown risk into the proposal. If it's very clear, there's less risk that they have to price into the proposal that sometimes causes proposals to come back higher. So looking at this list, I want to go over, and I won't go over all of these, but I do want to go over specifically the performance work statement and the statement of work, as these are very important documents that shape the requirement. The main difference between the PWS and the SOW, so the PWS is that performance work statement and the SOW is your statement of work, is that the SOW is prescriptive. It outlines the tasks and methods that must be followed by the contractor, whereas the PWS focuses more on the desired outcomes and measurable results of the project. The statement of work outlines the detailed work requirements for a specific project or service. These are best used for projects requiring detailed instructions, such as construction projects where you want to give a very detailed scope of work, deliverables, timelines, those types of things. On the other hand, you've got your performance work statement, your PWS, and this describes the outcomes and the performance expectations for the required services, rather than prescribing the methods for achieving these outcomes. In other words, unlike the SOW, the PWS focuses on the results instead of how to do the work. These types of statements, the performance work statement, is used for service contracts. So next thing on the list we need to talk about is our government cost estimate, our independent government cost estimate. I'm going to refer to it as the IGE. The IGE is a vital tool in the procurement process. It's a detailed cost estimate prepared by the government, and it is used to determine the expected cost of the project before receiving any bids or proposals. The IGE is used in various stages of the acquisition lifecycle. It helps to ensure the funds are allocated appropriately to the different line items. It is used to evaluate reasonableness of the contractor's proposals. It provides a basis for comparing contractor proposals and acts as a reference point during negotiations. Next, we have to route an internal document called a purchase request, or PR. This is an internal document that takes all of these individual documents, puts them all together, and gets routed to your acquisition team. This is also part of the financial process as well, because it assists in the financial planning and budgeting. It records anticipated expenses. It helps track and manage budget allocations. And it's really that formal record to start this process and financial accountability. So the key here is for that PR, that PR initiation is that formal request that gets sent to the contracting officer. So all these things are done before we even get to acquisition. All right, let's move on to the next slide. So I want to go over real quickly the customer roles and responsibilities throughout this entire process. As a customer, the process starts with you. You need to identify the need and bring it to PBS to start the planning stage. Your role requires collaboration with PBS to clearly define the scope of work, to include specific requirements, deliverables, and performance standards. Throughout this process, you're responsible for reviewing and agreeing to the scope of work, cost estimates, and project timelines proposed by GSA, bringing the appropriate technical SMEs from your agency to the table to actively participate in project discussions and decision-making, providing oversight and monitoring, which includes participating in periodic check-ins or progress meetings and assisting in resolving issues, and partnering with the COR to accept the work and deliverables upon completion. Effective communication and collaboration with the GSA and contractor is key to ensuring the work is completed to your satisfaction and that all financial obligations are met appropriately. Okay, here's the acquisition team. Notice we're still in the planning stage. So now that we covered what you all are doing as customers, what is the rest of the team responsible for? So the acquisition team is a customer-focused, multifunctional team that plans and manages the project requirement throughout its acquisition lifecycle. It includes a project manager, a contracting officer, a contracting officer's representative. We may include budget analysts, policy advisors, legal advisors, and any other stakeholders who have a vested interest in the project. It's essential for all stakeholders to be involved throughout the acquisition lifecycle, from the planning phase through the post-award phase. The duties, expertise, and contributions of each team member are important to the success of the project. So the project manager is, they're coming from the program office. They're responsible for managing the entire project from requirements development through closeout. They serve as the liaison between GSA and the client agency or customer. And they have purview over the scope, schedule, and budget throughout all the phases of the project lifecycle. The PM ensures that all the project team members accomplish their required tasks and collaborate with the contracting officer to ensure contract deliverables are met. They're also responsible for identifying and assessing and mitigating risk that may affect project success, including financial, technical, and schedule risks. The contracting officer plays a critical role in the acquisition process, as they are the only person that can legally bind the government. The CO must be a federal government employee and must have written delegation authority from their agency to enter into, administer, and terminate contracts. The CO oversees the entire solicitation process, including determining the procurement method, soliciting prices, and evaluating proposals to ensure fairness, transparency, and compliance with evaluation criteria. When necessary, the CO is the one that's conducting your negotiations to reach an agreement on contract terms, and then ultimately makes the award or awards the contract. During the contract administration phase, the contracting officer monitors contractor performance, I keep saying contractor, compliance and progress against established milestones and deliverables, and executes contract modifications and other administrative actions as needed. In the case of non-compliance, the contracting officer may initiate actions such as a cure notice, show cause letters, or termination proceedings. The CO will oversee the closeout process, ensuring that all contract deliverables are met, final payments are made, and necessary reports and documents are submitted. Overall, the contracting officer serves as the primary point of contact between the government and contractors, ensuring that contracts are executed efficiently, fairly, and in compliance with applicable laws and regulations. The next person on this list is your contracting officer's representative. On small projects, your project manager may also serve as the COR, so they might be the same individual on smaller RWA projects, but sometimes it can be separate. So these could be 3 people or 2 people. They must also be federal government employees, and they need to be appointed as the contracting officer's representative in writing by the contracting officer. The COR provides technical expertise related to the contract's scope of work, ensuring that contractors' performance meets the government requirements and standards. They review deliverables, milestones, and technical documentation submitted by the contractor to verify compliance. They're also the ones that are doing your site visits, inspections, and preparing inspection reports. They act as the CO's representative, so they too are, they serve as a primary point of contact between the government and the contractor on technical matters. The COR is also looking out to report any issues, discrepancies, or noncompliance so that the CO can take action, and they're required to maintain accurate records and documentation related to contractor performance. They're also the ones that review proposed changes to the contract scope or specifications and provide recommendations to the CO. The COR's close collaboration with the CO will help safeguard the government's interests and promote effective contract management. There was a question real quick that I can answer. Does the COR also need a warrant? No. All right, so let's move on to the next slide here. Perfect. So we have our main project team members. Now there may be a need for additional team members that provide expertise in policy, regulation, and finance. So policy experts, sometimes referred to as procurement analysts, they may be necessary to assist with analyzing contract actions or plans and determining the acquisition strategy for your requirement. So these are subject matter experts, and they can help interpret policies and regulations to ensure the solicitation aligns with federal laws. And we also have legal advisors. Legal serves as an advisor to ensure contracts comply with laws and regulations. They will review contract documents, such as our acquisition plan, the request for proposals, technical evaluations, and ensure that the contract is legally sufficient. They'll advise on risks and assist with any dispute resolution and manage litigation should that arise. And then finance, as we previously mentioned, finance monitors and approves the budget allocations for procurement activities. They also track expenditures. They put together forecasts and financial reporting for projects. So they're very important as well. All right, let's move on to the next slide. So we touched upon market research a little bit at the beginning of this, but it's an important part of the planning process. Market research is conducted to understand the industry's capabilities and helps to identify potential sources, including small businesses, which aid in the development of the procurement strategy. So basically, we want to see who's out there before we decide how we're going to purchase something. Proper market research can help us understand the market landscape and determine the best approach for meeting your requirements. It's also necessary to determine if there are small business concerns capable of meeting the requirements so that we can provide the maximum practical opportunities to small businesses and socioeconomic concerns. It's important for the contracting officer to begin early coordination with the Office of Small Business Utilization within GSA to help identify potential sources. Small business considerations impact the process as it can drive the procurement method, which will impact procurement timelines. Contracting officer conducts the appropriate market research and consults with GSA ASDBU and sometimes the SBA to make a decision as to whether a requirement is suitable for a small business set aside. Now, keep in mind that GSA is required to give small business consideration first before considering other options. And the vast majority of RWA projects under $250,000 are set aside for small businesses with very few exceptions. The contracting officer may also consider a sole source through SBA's 8A program, as I mentioned in one of the examples earlier. Up to $4 million, we can do that as a sole source and without needing additional justifications or approvals. So it's a little bit faster contract vehicle. Utilizing the 8A program is ideal for requirements where there's a lower risk with less complexity, and it's also quicker than a traditional competitive method. All right, so now we need to determine how are we going to evaluate our proposals. So proposals are typically evaluated based on a set of criteria designed to ensure offerers provide the best value to the government in terms of cost, quality, and performance. To conduct an effective evaluation, proposal evaluation criteria must be clearly identified and defined in the request for proposal. So typically, this isn't applicable for all requirements all of the time. Usually it's a combination of what we have listed on this slide here, and it's based on the specifics of the requirement. So we have that technical capability. This allows the program office and the contracting office to determine how well the proposal meets technical requirements of the solicitation. The past performance is about the contractor's reputation, reliability, and customer satisfaction. So the CO will use reviews of performance on past projects, references, and customer satisfaction surveys to assess past performance. And then you have your cost or price of the project. This evaluates the whether or not the cost is reasonable and realistic for the work to be performed. And as we mentioned previously, we have to consider small businesses as well as socioeconomic considerations. So it'll look at size status, whether or not they have a socioeconomic consideration, and we want to ensure that we are promoting and maximizing practical opportunities to small business concerns. All right, let's move on to solicitation phase. Okay, so we finally made it to the solicitation phase. All of that was planning. Phase 1 of 5. As I mentioned in the beginning, it seems like a black hole, but as you can see from what we've already discussed, the requirement is being worked behind the scenes. So the solicitation phase is the next in the project lifecycle. The amount of time spent in the solicitation phase is dependent on the procurement method, the complexity, the amendments, any request from the contractor to have more time on their proposal, a lot of things. So although it's not common for small projects, if we did do something on an unrestricted basis, there's a minimum 15-minute days where a minimum of 15 days where we need to post a synopsis. And then there's also a minimum of 30 days where we need to post the solicitation. Both of these actions are posted on sam.gov because that is our official source for posting contracting opportunities. But as I mentioned, that's very uncommon for small projects. The vast majority of the small projects are set aside for small business concerns, and they utilize the 8A program, or there are orders placed against existing indefinite delivery or indefinite quantity IDIQ. You might have heard that term before, IDIQ vehicles. So these IDIQs are typically comprised of small businesses, and they're set up to speed up the solicitation process. All right, so some key points to remember. The contracting officer is responsible for drafting the solicitation. The program office assists the contracting officer in drafting the solicitation. Policy and legal may need to review some things, and the timeline can vary based off the complexity of the requirement. All right, we can move on to evaluation. All right, proposal evaluation. This is a critical step in the procurement process where the government reviews and assesses proposals submitted by contractors to determine which one best meets the requirements of the solicitation. The contracting officer is the one that oversees this phase of the process. The program office plays an integral role in the evaluation process because they're the subject matter experts and they're responsible for the technical evaluation of the contractor's proposal. So we receive proposals. The proposals include details on how the contractor plans to fulfill the contract requirements, pricing, some of the evaluation factors might include a technical approach, past performance, or other relevant information that we included in the solicitation. So all that comes in from the contractors. The first step is to do a compliance review to ensure that each proposal meets the basic requirements of the solicitation. This includes checking that the proposal was submitted on time, that it follows the correct format, and it includes all the necessary documentation. The technical evaluation is done by the program office, and they'll do a risk assessment of sorts on the proposal to see how well the contractor understands the requirements and whether the proposed solution is feasible and effective. These evaluation factors need to be outlined in the RFP, and then it'll be up to the program office to ensure that they're evaluating the proposal based off of what was included in the RFP. Once that evaluation is completed, the contracting officer reviews the evaluation and makes a final decision on which proposal offers the best value to the government. So this timeline, it really depends on the level of competition and the acquisition strategy chosen. So it takes less time to evaluate one proposal versus if you get 10 or 15 proposals. So that timeline is really hard to determine before receiving proposals. And then the next step in this process is to create a report and include all that in the contract file. All right, the award phase. We're finally at the award phase. The contracting officer is responsible for this phase of the process as well. In the award phase, the government formally selects a contractor to fulfill the contract, and the contracting officer enters into a contractual agreement with a successful offeror. The award phase has several steps, including pre-award clearance, contract responsibility, final price negotiation, contract preparation, contract review, contract award, debriefings, a bunch of things. They're all listed there. So we're going to just touch on the steps that have an impact on the award timeline. In some cases, negotiations may be necessary before the contract is awarded. This is especially common in negotiated procurements where the government and the contractor need to agree on the final terms, conditions, and pricing. The contracting officer will develop its negotiation objectives and conduct the negotiations. Then the draft contract undergoes a final review by legal counsel and other stakeholders to ensure compliance with all applicable laws and regulations. It may be required, depending on the requirement, for approvals at higher levels, depending on the complexity and the dollar amount. For the most part, those smaller projects will only have a legal review. Then the contracting officer formally awards the contract to the selected contractor. And this involves actually signing a contractual document and issuing an official award notice. The other thing that may delay the start of a contract is a potential protest. So if an unsuccessful vendor believes that the contract award process was flawed, they may file a protest with the contracting officer or the Government Accountability Office. Next slide, please. Post-award. Post-award begins once the contract has been awarded and continues through the contract closeout. It involves managing the contract, ensuring that both the government and the contractor meet their obligations. The key step in the post-award phase are contract administration, monitoring performance, modifications as necessary, doing inspections and invoicing, managing risks, contract closeout, post-performance review, and we'll talk on contract termination a little bit if that's necessary. So during contract administration, the contracting officer is responsible for overseeing the contract, ensuring compliance with terms and conditions, and making key decisions such as approving changes, managing disputes, overseeing payments. The COR, as we talked about before, is really just that day-to-day that's monitoring contractor performance. The government will do its inspections. They will fill out receiving reports, make payments based off of the work that has been completed, and may need to do some contract modifications depending on unforeseen circumstances or changes in scope. Only the contracting officer has the authority to modify the contract. As work progresses, the contractor submits the invoices, and we make sure that those payments are made accordingly. So work is progressing, we're making payments, we're at the end. As the contract nears completion, the contractor submits all final deliverables for review and acceptance by the government. Then the program office is responsible for conducting final inspections to make sure that we've received everything and it's been completed to the required standards and the deliverables required in the contract. We will do an assessment of the contractor's performance, and we're recorded in CPARs, and we will make sure that we've identified whether or not they've done exceptional or not so great. And those factors, the factors that we look at are quality, schedule, cost control, business relationship, and management. So we may, sometimes we do have to terminate contracts. So there are two ways or two reasons that we would terminate a contract. We can do it for convenience or default. For convenience is for the convenience of the government, not for the convenience of the contractor. The other one is if it's for default. So this basically means that the contractor failed to meet the contract terms, so we can go through the process to terminating the contract. This structured approach to contract administration and management helps ensure that the government's objectives are met and the contract is completed successfully, and any issues are addressed in a timely and effective manner. So now we can go to questions. So this is just, these are questions for the first half of this. We have another half of a presentation here. So yeah, let's get started.
Sure. So taking a look at some of the questions we currently have in the Q&A, our first question is from Linda, and it's, for RWAs submitted via eRITA when operating under a CR, should an RWA be created to show the full amount anticipated for the fiscal year, or only show the amount for the CR period? If for the CR amount, wouldn't a modification be required and then updated within eRITA?
So this is testing my pricing policy knowledge. It's not an acquisition question. I believe that the request should go in for the full amount. However, the funding needs to be available. We can always modify an RWA as long as the original funding source is still available and not expired. That's the extent of my pricing policy experience.
Look, you already have a lot of knowledge. We're not expecting you to have every answer in the book. Our next question is, what if we have a known small business that is offering better pricing than what GSA is charging? Does GSA consider that?
We can. So it does depend on how we're doing it though. So just a small business that doesn't have like a different socioeconomic category, we'd have to compete that. So we have a requirement to go to the different socioeconomic categories as well. So if it's like an 8A company that we can do a sole source contract to, absolutely, yes. We will talk to that vendor, and if they're definitely charging less, why not? You know? But it really does depend on, is there a contract vehicle or a set aside that I can use to get to that business?
Gotcha. We have one other question that was entered into the chat instead of the QA pod. Is there a standardized format to receive proposals such as furniture requirements?
No. No, there isn't. It really does depend on the contract officer you're working with. Even within specific regions, it's not apples to apples sometimes from contracting officer to contracting officer. It really just depends on your requirement. We should have line items, especially if we're doing a furniture requirement. That's a commercial item that we would normally go off the GSA schedule to purchase. So, you know, it would have this many chairs, this many desks, this many monitors, I don't know. But there should be at least those uniform line items that a vendor should be filling out. So we give the vendors the pricing sheets. They need to fill it out that way so that we're comparing apples to apples between the different proposals.
All right. Do we have any other questions before we move forward? Give them just a minute in case anyone wants to. Here we go. Can you explain, as a COR, how you would manage payment or invoice requests on a fixed price contract versus a T&M conference?
T&M contract, I'm assuming. Yes. So on a fixed price contract, it's about the work that's being earned. So a fixed price contract, I am going to get a deliverable at the end of the project. So I am only going to pay you for the work that is in place. So that's either I'm looking at the progress on a construction project, and I feel like this is about 75% complete, so I will pay you 75%. Whereas on a time and material contract, this is a fully reimbursable contract. It's exactly what it says. So the time that the contractors put in place and the material, they will need to show you proof on the time they've spent on something and the material that they've purchased for your project. So that's how that would go. Those contracts are much more risky because, of course, it's fully reimbursable, whereas that fixed price contract, it shifts the risk of completing that project within a certain budget. And we're not responsible for cost overruns. So I would recommend not doing a time and material contract.
Do MBE, WBE, or DVBE businesses receive priority to submit bids?
So they would have to also be small businesses. So I'm assuming that's also a small business. So if you're a minority owned large business, no, that would be just an unrestricted basis. But if it's a small business and they're, we have small disadvantaged business as a category that receives priority. If it was on an unrestricted basis, we will give like additional points to small business concern so that they can have an advantage in the evaluation process. And then of course the 8As, an 8A, we can do a sole source directly to an 8A under 4 million.
All right. Well, for now, looks like that's all the questions we've gotten. So let's keep moving forward.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Shantae. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Now that we have some understanding of the procurement process, let us now talk about the associated constraints and risk. So what is the difference between a constraint and risk? In layman terms, a constraint is a real-world limitation, while a risk is an uncertain event that something could go wrong. For example, take building a new home. One constraint would be the budget limitations because of the material prices, the change in prices, whereas the risk would be poor workmanship resulting in your home not being built, not being up to code, causing expensive repairs because you probably selected a wrong contractor. During the acquisition process, the government is subject to both constraints and risk to the project's budget and schedule. This slide lists some of the constraints and risks associated with the procurement process. I will not go into details about every constraint listed on the slide, but will touch on some of the most common ones. While government regulations help protect all of us during the procurement process, regulatory compliance can be a constraint. Take the Federal Acquisition Regulation and agency-specific rules, for example. These regulations and rules can impose strict guidelines on how contracts are executed, potentially limiting flexibility. Some of these rules limit the contracting officer's influence over how long a requirement takes to get awarded due to specified timeframes required for different steps in the acquisition process. Another big constraint is the agency's budget. As you know, the government's budget allocations are fixed and often determined annually, which can limit the funds available for a project. In my career, I have seen requirement packets pulled back due to an agency losing funding that they initially thought they had. But that funding was taken away and given to another agency, or sometimes it's simply reduced. Also, there are times when programs are cut short due to the lack of funding, resulting in the government exercising the right to terminate the contract for convenience. In essence, one can probably say that the procurement process itself can also be considered a constraint for executing a project, as the lengthy and complex procurement process, including proposal evaluation and contract award, can delay project start and completion times. Lastly, in select markets or with some projects, we can experience a resource availability constraint due to the limited availability of skilled personnel, technology, or materials, which can impact the ability to meet project timelines or budget. Let us now discuss some risk. Again, we will just talk about a few of them, not all of the risks listed on this slide. If the statement of work and request for proposal is not properly written, scope creep could happen causing uncontrolled changes or continuous scope additions, which can ultimately lead to budget overruns and schedule delays, which is why it is super important to have a clear statement of work and request for proposal aligning with the project requirements. Another risk is not selecting the contractor with the best value. If the best value contractor is not selected, we could end up with poor contractor performance, which can result in delays, cost overruns, or failure to meet technical specifications, posing significant risk to your projects. Technical challenge is another risk, which can cause unforeseen technical difficulties and lead to delays and additional costs, which is why it is important to have the technical experts on the technical evaluation team to ensure that the contractor's proposal illustrates that they can meet your project's requirement. Understanding these constraints and risks is vital for producing an effective requirement packet, request for proposal, and contract, and can help ensure projects stay on track and within budget. So now that we know what those constraints and risks are, let's talk about how to mitigate these constraints and risk. We can do so by ensuring that the contract includes clear definitions of scope, deliverables, and risk-sharing arrangements, including comprehensive risk management strategies and plans, along with contingency plans in your requirements packet, which becomes part of the contract, would definitely help mitigate those risks. We should also conduct regular progress audits, inspections, and monitor contractor performance to identify potential issues early. Most importantly, maintain open lines of communication with the contractor, contracting officer, and all stakeholders, and provide quick responses to issues. Now, we'll talk about your role and how you could help mitigate these constraints and risk. I would like to start by stating that the program office plays a vital role in mitigating constraints and risk, as well as you, the client. You do so by providing insights, resources, and active collaboration. Doing everything listed on these slides will help you mitigate constraints and risk. For example, when you and your program office clearly define and communicate requirements early in the acquisition process, it can help prevent misunderstandings or misaligned expectations, which in turn ensures that both the CO, contracting officer, and industry have a full understanding of project needs, thus reducing risk associated with poor proposals, which can lead to project delays and scope creep. Providing subject matter experts when required is very important in helping mitigate these constraints and risk, as the technical expertise to evaluate the contractor's proposal and monitor contractor performance ensures that the technical requirements and performance standards are met. By doing so, performance issues or non-compliance can be detected early and can help the contracting officer take corrective action before problems escalate. Using the subject matter experts to collaborate with the contracting officer to identify potential risk at various stages, such as financial, schedule, technical, or performance risk, is also impactful in ensuring that your project is successful, as your contracting officer uses that program-specific knowledge to analyze how these risks could impact project objectives, which can help mitigate delays and unexpected costs. The program office works closely with the contracting officer to develop realistic schedules considering both program needs and contracting laws and procedures. We recommend supporting, agreeing, and following these schedules when required. Keep in mind that overly aggressive schedules often lead to increased risk. By ensuring that timelines are feasible, the program office can help prevent delays or quality issues. We ask that you do your best to adhere to any established schedules to reduce disruption of the project's timeline. Lastly, but also very important, minimize unnecessary changes to reduce delays and scope creep. By actively working with the contracting officer, everyone is aligned and potential constraints and risks are managed more effectively. Now we'll go to any questions.
Looks like in the Q&A pod, we have one question. Does SAM.gov refer to the 1170 lease contracting officers as contracting officers? There's no role in SAM.gov specifically designed for LCOs or realty specialists. Yes. Is there a specific term? A role?
I don't know the answer to that question. I would think that contracting officer is sufficient because LCOs also have to go through a warranting process. So LCO stands for lease contracting officer. So they also need to be appointed. So I would believe that contracting officer is the appropriate role. But I don't know for sure. It'll be one of those that we get back to you on when we when we answer the
Yes.
Q&A.
And as a reminder, any questions that we are not able to answer, either in terms of time or are not able to fully answer, will be on that CES website that I mentioned earlier, and that I will tell you again at the end of this presentation. We have one other question, which is how can we minimize delays from the contractor, even if the scope of work clearly defines it?
There's a section that Lena's going to be going over related to trying to mitigate that risk. So let's have Lena go over that section first, and then, if there's still a question, we can revisit that.
Sounds good. Let's press forward.
All right.
Okay, so we'll continue with timelines, something near and dear to your hearts. We know everyone are very concerned about timelines. We know that the contracting officer relies on the program office for technical expertise, requirements definition, evaluation criteria, and contract performance monitoring. The program office is responsible for several tasks which impacts the acquisition process timeline. Some of these tasks include defining and validating the requirement, which involves developing the requirements packet to include preparing cost estimates, securing funding. As we all know, the CEO cannot proceed with the solicitation without committed funding, as Shantae spoke about earlier. Another action, which is controlled by the program office and can impact the timeline, is when developing the technical evaluation criteria and factors for the solicitation. The contracting officer waits for these criteria to be finalized to include them in the request for proposal, and also depends on the program office input to finalize the solicitation document. In addition, the program office plays an integral role in the slot selection process by evaluating technical proposals and providing recommendations based on technical criteria, which includes reviewing the final selection and providing recommendations or approvals before the contracting officer awards the contract. For contract changes and modifications, the contracting officer also waits on the program office and sometimes the client to assess the need, scope, and impact of the proposed changes. The contracting officer may also have to wait for any additional funding that's required to complete that modification. During post-award, the program office is responsible for monitoring contractor performance and reporting issues. The contracting officer relies on these reports to address performance issues and enforce contract terms. Program office delays at any of these stages impact the timelines of the acquisition process, as the contracting officer is unable to move to the next step. So we wanted to give you an idea of what steps could impact the process, and now we'll show you some general timelines on the next slide. So on this slide, you'll see some timelines listed by phases, along with the actions that take place during those phases. We have a small disclaimer that we ask that you pay attention to. The timelines listed on this slide can vary based on the complexity of the request, completeness of the requirements packet, along with other information documents provided, and the need for any additional approvals or clarifications. So we ask that you please keep in mind when looking at those timelines. GSA has established timelines and processes for the acquisition process to ensure efficient and timely execution of projects. These timelines cover the phases from initiation to closeout, ensuring that projects are planned, funded, and executed within agreed upon timeframes while in compliance with rules and regulations. While you're reviewing this slide, we would like to talk about some important considerations when planning your requirement. Consider planning and engaging the contracting officer as early as possible, as early engagement with GSA helps a smoother acquisition process, helps develop an efficient acquisition strategy, and helps mitigate risk, result in realistic timelines that avoid delays while promoting clear communication. We also recommend discussing your needs with GSA as soon as that need is identified. Please keep in mind that some projects may require additional time for planning approvals and execution. This can include securing necessary permits, conducting extensive planning meetings, security requirements, and ensuring all regulatory requirements are met. Also remember that the contracting officer must follow all regulatory compliance and applicable federal regulations. Understanding the procurement process and GSA's timelines will help ensure that the projects are managed effectively and completed on schedule. And we'll move to any questions.
No additional questions right now. We can keep moving forward.
So, okay. We will now briefly discuss how we can protect source selection and contractor information, procurement integrity. It is important to understand that under the Procurement Integrity Act, the contracting officer must navigate the balance between effective communication with the program office while maintaining procurement integrity. So let us talk about some of the information that the contracting officer can share with you and still maintain procurement integrity. The contracting officer can discuss the overall acquisition strategy, including procurement methods and timelines to align expectations and ensure coordinating planning, to include funding availability, budget constraints, and cost estimates to facilitate effective planning and ensure the acquisition is financially viable. The contracting officer could also share the scope, technical requirements, and objectives of the solicitation to ensure alignment with program needs. Can also discuss that information with you, the scope of the contract, the technical requirements and objectives, as you are the subject matter expert. And some of that also includes sharing insights from market research, such as potential sources and industry capabilities, because it helps you understand the market conditions. The contracting officer can also share draft versions of the solicitation documents. It allows the program office and customer agency to provide technical input and ensure requirements are accurately captured. The contracting officer can work with the program office on developing and refining technical evaluation criteria in order to ensure they align with the program's objectives. It is also okay for the contracting officer to discuss the procedures for proposal evaluation, including the roles and responsibilities of the evaluation team, to ensure that the program office understands the process and their role in it. Please keep in mind that proposal information is not shared beyond those involved in the source selection process and requires the signing of non-disclosure agreements. The contracting officer can also share information on contractor performance, including progress reports and compliance issues, in order to help the program office effectively monitor and manage the contract. The CO can discuss potential contract modifications, including the rationale and scope, to assess the impact and ensure they are necessary and justified. While it is okay for the contracting officer to share the above information with the program office, please keep in mind that the program office should not be sharing this information with people who do not have the need to know. Now that we have talked about information that this contracting officer can share, let us talk about a key principle to maintaining that procurement integrity. The government, to include the contracting officer, program office, client, and all other stakeholders, must ensure that any shared information does not give any contractor offer an unfair competitive advantage, such as cost data, technical data, and schedule information from proposals. Any information related to the source selection process, including evaluations, rankings, must be kept confidential and only shared with authorized personnel. And that is to prevent, as Shantae spoke about earlier, any protests, which will delay the project. It is the contracting officer's duty to protect proprietary and sensitive information obtained from contractors, ensuring it is not disclosed inappropriately. The contracting officer must maintain fairness and transparency in all communications, ensuring that the information shared with the program office does not prejudice or bias the procurement process. By adhering to the principle listed on this slide, contracting officers can share essential information with their program office to facilitate effective procurement while upholding the integrity of the process. Are there any questions?
We had one other question come in. how would you handle final payments or closeouts for a contract that ends on September 30th? Yes, a fiscal year question.
Yes. So, the September 30th date isn't an issue for contracts that have already been awarded. So if a contract ends on 9/30, payments are usually done in arrears anyway. So if your period of performance ends 9/30, we're doing an inspection maybe the first week of October, and then we do the inspection report, and then we would do the payment. So as long as the money is obligated, we're not at risk of losing it on the September 30th date.
I've recently had my own situation with an RWA that was supposed to be in place on October 1st, and it wasn't, so much more of the process going on there, but we can move forward.
And the key is that it already has to be under a contract, right? So like if funding expires on 9/30 and we don't yet have it on a contract, that's a different story. But if it's a contract that expires on the 30th of September, it doesn't, there isn't, and like that date doesn't really affect it.
Thank you for clarifying.
Mhm.
All right, we can keep pushing forward.
Okay, so let's talk about holding the contractor responsible. The contractor has several high-level roles and responsibilities that are critical to the successful execution of a contract. We'll begin with the roles. Upon contract award, the contractor is tasked with the role of either the service provider or product provider, depending on whether providing a service or good. As the service or good provider, the contractor delivers goods or services as specified in the contract. There are two roles that the contractor always plays, which are the roles as a subject matter expert and partner. As a subject matter expert, the contractor provides specialized knowledge or technical expertise. Please always remember that the contractor is the subject matter expert, which is why we are paying them. We are not here to train the contractor. As a partner, the contractor works with the government to achieve project objectives and goals. Our goal is to work with the contractor to attain a successful and effective product or service. Now let's talk about those responsibilities. The contractor is responsible for delivering the goods or services specified in the contract in accordance with the agreed upon terms, timeframes, conditions, and quality standards, while performing the work exactly as outlined in the contract scope within the allotted budget, avoiding unauthorized deviations or changes unless formally approved through contract modifications. The contractor must also provide regular updates and maintain clear communication with the contracting agency, including submitting required reports and documentation. In addition, they must follow all applicable laws, regulations, and ethical standards, including those related to cybersecurity, data protection, and conflict of interest. Identifying, assessing, and mitigating risks that could impact contractor performance are some additional contractor responsibilities, to include addressing any issues or disputes promptly and effectively to minimize disruption to the project. In a nutshell, the contractor must adhere to the terms and conditions of the contract, meet and maintain the specifications and quality listed in the contract while managing all risk, staying within budget, and complying with all laws and regulations. And keep in mind, any changes that needs to be made to the contractor can simply ask you to change the contract. It must be a modification signed by the contracting officer. Now that we know the contractor's roles and responsibilities, how do we hold them accountable? Holding a contractor responsible is essential to ensuring that the government receives the goods or services as specified in the contract. Several tools and strategies are employed throughout the contracting process to hold the contractor accountable. We start by clearly defining the scope of work, deliverables, performance standards, timelines, and quality expectations, which helps avoid ambiguities that could lead to delays and disputes. Clearly communicating expectations and concerns with the contractor throughout the contract period is also another way to help hold the contractor responsible. Address any issues promptly and collectively to mitigate potential risk and resolve disputes. engage the contracting officer representative and contracting officer on the onset. Monitor contract performance and provide feedback. If the contractor's performance does not improve despite efforts to address concerns, escalate the issue within the agency and contractor's corporate leadership. Involve senior management or legal counsel as needed to explore additional remedies and enforcement actions. Another key way of holding the contract responsible is maintaining detailed documentation of all communications, performance evaluations, and actions taken regarding the contractor's performance, as this documentation will be crucial if further dispute resolution or legal action becomes necessary. Review the contract terms to determine available remedies for contractor performance deficiencies and engage the contracting officer. This may include withholding payments, impose liquidated damages, or terminating the contract for default if necessary. We utilize systems like the Contractor Performance Assessments Reporting System to assess the contractor's performance against predetermined criteria outlined in the contract. So the Contractor Performance Assessment Reporting System, or CPAS, is in essence the contractor's report card. So it is very important that at the end of the contractor's performance that the CPAS is used to report that performance. Document any deviations from the agreed upon standards, including quality, timeliness, and compliance. These are just some things that the program office can do to hold the contractor responsible. And I think now we will turn it over to Victor with some announcements.
Yes. Thank you very much. Give me just one moment here. Thank you.
Victor, real quick, I just wanted to make sure that the question regarding holding the contractor accountable was addressed sufficiently. I don't know who asked the question, but I just want to make sure that Lena covered it.
Absolutely. Does anyone in the audience require further clarification on holding the contractor responsible? Feel free to jot it down in the Q&A pod.
Sounds like Lena did a perfect job. Thank you.
I mean, are we really surprised? All right, so I will detail the PBS Project Pulse Survey now. The Project Pulse Surveys are sent on RWA projects at RWA acceptance level, at official midpoint, and at the RWA substantial completion for all projects, regardless of the dollar value. They're also distributed for lease projects at request for lease proposal, lease award, and lease effective dates. These can provide PBS with feedback from customers who are the project points of contact, like you in the audience here today, so that you can help us to inform these contractor evaluations using the CPARS tool that Lena and Shante detailed earlier, to coach and mentor staff by adopting lessons learned and sharing practices, improving internal processes, and developing classes for our CES program, like this event on contracting and acquisition today, like our schedule management and cost estimating sessions held earlier this year in 2024, and an upcoming class we have on project management basics coming January 30th, 2025. When you see an incoming email from Project Pulse Surveys at research.gsa.gov with the subject line, "How did GSA do?" please open it and complete the survey. We appreciate your participation, and your specific feedback really helps us to improve our project management program. That feedback is also actively reviewed and used to determine the best practices moving forward on all projects, meaning it is extremely valuable to us in the public building service. Now that we've detailed the Project Pulse Survey, I'd like to thank Lena and Shante for such a great presentation today. I also want to thank all of you in our audience for joining us, our clients who are able to join us for this presentation today. We will be posting formal responses to the questions that were left in the Q&A pod, as well as any that made it into the chat panel instead, as a frequently asked questions document for future reference on our website, and that's gsa.gov/CES, and on the that one. Thank you for joining us for our first presentation of the fiscal year. We at the Client Enrichment Series would like to shout out some of our upcoming presentations that you may also find interesting. In November, we will be hosting our RWA-centered training on the RWA policy and process fundamentals. This will be an encore of our previous sessions you may have attended, but it's always great to get some more clarification or just refresh yourself for the new fiscal year. Then later in November, we will be hosting a presentation featuring updates on the water quality testing that was performed this past year. If you want to learn more or sign up, you can again go to our website, gsa.gov/CES. The goal of the Client Enrichment Series is to engage our audiences in workplace topics that contribute to your mission success and to your effective management of your real estate and workplace programs. Please join us for any and all of our presentations that you find interesting, and you may be surprised at the new information you gain along the way. Thank you again for joining us, and have a wonderful rest of your day.